Before we begin today's episode, I want to let you know that this conversation contains discussion of sexual violence committed during the October 7th Hamas attacks on Israel. This content may be distressing for some listeners. So if you are listening around children or in a sensitive environment, please take a moment to ensure this is the right time and place to listen. Thank you for being here for this important conversation. My guest on Behind the Headlines is Dr. Cochav Elkayam-Levy, the founder and chair of the Civil Commission on October 7th Crimes by Hamas against Women and Children. By way of background, the wonderful Cochav is an expert in international law and human rights and teaches at Rahman University in Israel, and is recipient of the 2024 Israel Prize, Israel's highest civilian honor. After October 7, Cochav has represented the Israeli women's rights protest movement at the United Nations and was among the principal authors of a legal analysis co-authored by, I understand, leading feminist scholars opposing the judicial overhaul in Israel. Cochav is also the 2024 recipient of the Perez Center for Peace and Innovation's Medal of Distinction, amongst other awards. Cochav sits on the Public Council of Women Wage Peace, the Israeli Women's Peace Movement. The Civil Commission on October 7th Crimes by Hamas against Women and Children is, from my understanding, attempting something much larger than merely documenting atrocities. It is creating an evidentiary archive that can withstand legal scrutiny, defeat denialism, and support future prosecutions and establish an historical record. In this ambition, it aims to build an archive, as we've understood that we've needed to do after the Holocaust. So in this unique interview with this incredibly inspiring person, I'm not asking what happened. Instead, I want to explore the legal, the moral, the psychological, and the historical implications of the civilian massacres of October 7th, especially to women and children, and what that means for us after October 7th. Cochav Elkayam-Levy, welcome to Behind the Headlines. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Adam.
Let's start with the goal of the commission that you founded. It's to create, as I said, an archive similar in significance to Holocaust documentation. So at what point did you realize that October 7th wasn't simply another of the worst terrorist attacks, but an event whose historical record itself would become a battlefield?
So early. Adam, I'm thinking about it now, and I understood very, very, very quickly that something is deeply wrong. As you know, I teach international law, I teach human rights, I know the UN systems and its mechanisms, and having watched myself, the atrocities unfold in real time, and the fact that many mechanisms were not responding, giving voice to the victims, calling for the returns of the hostages, giving voice or condemning the atrocities, I understood instantly that something is deeply wrong. And the second week after the attack, it was October, I think 15, it was right a week afterwards, I wrote a WhatsApp message to my colleagues. I was like, we have to gather together and start communicating what we see here as experts on the ground happening. Very naively, I thought that perhaps they don't understand. Perhaps, I don't know, something is wrong. I knew something is wrong. And we started sending communications to the UN, to many entities, telling them, we need your help. Essentially, I said, we need your help. And a week went by, and another week, and another week, and I understood they're not responding. Many of the mechanisms that I personally teach of their importance were not even giving voice to the hostages that were taken so violently. And it was the end of November when I had to deliver a speech to the most important international committee, the Committee on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, the CEDAW committee. It was a day after they released a statement not mentioning October 7th, not mentioning our hostages, which is an ongoing crime against humanity, that I understood we have to start documenting everything. I told them, is there international law for Israeli women? Are you going to protect us? I'm not going to repeat one resolution of the UN that I know by heart, because you're failing us. You're failing us as a people, you're failing us as women, and you're failing victims of sexual violence, not only in Israel, but everywhere.
Did you get any response to that powerful speech?
Wow. First of all, it became viral. Many here in Israel have heard that I'm going to speak, so many sent me information. I think it sparked an international protest, a protest of many Jewish communities around the world, women that have heard me. I almost cried there. I was shaking. And I was there on behalf of the Israeli protest movement. So it was really circulated widely and globally. And I think it was a moment when we all understood that we are going to a second battle, that we have another fight to fight. It's not only a battle to regain, to respond to the trauma, to what happened here. It's a battle now over truth. I think I understood it most vividly only last week when I was asked to speak at the anti-Semitism conference here in Haifa, the International Anti-Semitism Conference, that I said that we understood very early that this is an epistemic war, that by legal documentation, we are fighting anti-Semitic movements that took upon themselves very early to dismantle the truth. And by establishing a legal record, the most comprehensive legal record on the crimes, and as you said, historical record, I knew we are reclaiming our truth, reclaiming our stories, owning our own narrative.
Yes. I want to have a conversation with you about the aspects of truth and narrative, but I want to start in a way at the beginning that
Can
you're
I add something? Just Adam,
sure,
sorry.
sure.
That the very beginning, we didn't understand all these processes. We just knew that we are giving voice to those who can no longer speak. We were
Yes.
seeing people and bodies and victims and hearing from survivors and first responders testimonies that were beyond comprehension. And we saw with our own eyes the condition of the bodies. So for us, it was very fundamental humanistic responsibility to the victims to give them voice. And we knew that they cannot speak anymore. Many of them cannot speak anymore. And we have to tell them, to tell the world what happened to them.
Yeah. Cochav, we felt that in Australia very quickly. Within a day, you will have known of the celebration of the Hamas atrocities at the Opera House, and within weeks, genocide. Israel had not even gone into Gaza, and genocide was the call. So all of this has come to the surface, and it comes out in different narratives. And I want to come back to the narratives that we're all fighting. But I want to start at a very particular place, which is that your work argues that these crimes weren't random acts of brutality. A word I read very early on was pre-civilizational barbarity in some of the descriptions of the things that happen to women and families. So my question is, if they're not random, and you've argued that, why were entire families deliberately targeted? And what either strategic or ideological purpose did you think that held for the Hamas fighters?
I want to make something very clear. After immersing ourselves in the evidence, in photos, images, videos that the perpetrators, the terrorists, filmed by themselves, they filmed themselves, they uploaded it to Telegram, they sent it to families. They were the ones glorifying the violence. After immersing ourselves in these videos, which I can speak for a lot about the trauma that this imposed on us, and after reviewing and collecting and filming testimonies ourselves, I can tell you without doubt that the sexual violence of October 7th was systematic, calculated. It was a strategy, very simply put. We were able to identify 13 patterns of sexual abuse. And I really encourage everyone who listens now to Google Silence No More, the report of the Civil Commission, review, as scholars in the field, activists in the field. Once you read the report, we initially documented the crimes by locations. And then when you see that they have acted similarly in different locations, it kind of overwhelms you to see how similarly they operated on October 7th and against hostages that were placed and held in different locations across the Gaza Strip. So when you hear hostages, when you collect the testimonies, and when you put it very methodologically in Excel spreadsheet to find the themes, the fact that we were able to find 13 themes, 13 patterns of operations shows that it wasn't random, that it was calculated, that they shot women in their faces again and again and again. They shot women in the genital area. They mutilated genital areas of men and women. They performed sexual violence of family members in front of one another. We had to coin a new term. This is what you were talking about, kinocidal sexual violence. Kin as in familial relation, kinocidal as in the systemicity of performing and torturing family through sexual violence in ways that maximizes pain and suffering. I'll tell you that while we were documenting the sexual violence, while we were collecting the information and reviewing this ourselves, it's not only that we collect the information as legal scholars and trauma experts and experts in sexual violence, we watch them, we analyze this, and we see them again and again and again. And what happened is that we started seeing from piles of information videos that the terrorists filmed themselves when they entered the houses. Now, they could have murdered everyone, right? They could have just, if the purpose was execution or killing or maximizing the killing, that could have been very simple. They could have gone from house to house to house and just kill everyone. What they did was awful in the sense that they have allowed us a window to hell. They entered the houses, they killed one member or two members, they had others watching this in horror, and they filmed it. And sometimes they filmed it uploading the videos to the social media of the victims themselves. In one case, for instance, the Dunn family that we describe very extensively, they enter the house, they take the phone of the mother, and you see the father hands covered with blood. We understand that their eldest daughter, Mayan, who was just celebrated 18, the house, you see the house in the video covered with balloons, and you see the father, his hands covered with blood, and the mother is screaming, this didn't happen, this didn't happen. And her little siblings are on the floor there asking, where is she, or what happened to her? And you see the family. Really, Adam, I saw everything. I saw so many things, and these videos we felt physically unable to document. And I understood as an expert that I don't know how to describe this. There isn't legal category to describe the torture of families. There isn't a crime against humanity or a crime defined in international law that talks about the torture of family, the violence against families. And I found myself calling experts around the world, asking them, what is this? What am I seeing? Where can I read this? Where can I find the right way to describe the kind of violence that we're seeing. And they told me, and I saw their puzzled responses. What are you talking about? What do you mean violence against families? And this is when we understood, and I understood, that we need to conceptualize this legal phenomena. So we coined it as kinocide. Kin, as I said, is in familial relation. Inside.
So if in English, KINOCID,
Exactly.
kinocide.
Exactly.
The deliberate destruction of families as families, destruction and or torture.
Yeah, because when you hurt a family member, it's one thing to know that you killed someone individually. It's another thing to have a member of the family witness it. It's another thing to witness it. It wasn't just physical witnessing; it was also digital. They sent videos to families that we now represent in courts here in Israel, because those families, some of the families were not there physically, but they sent them the videos or images of their loved ones murdered. And so we are trying to help them get compensation of victims of terror. To close this point, I just want to say that while we were documenting the sexual violence, we put a spotlight on instances of sexual violence conducted in front of family members. And the suffering caused to families, it didn't just happen here by Hamas, it happened elsewhere around the world. In one case, we were able to document a case of two family members, and I cannot share a lot of information about that, but one case of two family members that were forced to commit sexual acts on one another. The compound trauma, the intergenerational trauma that it creates is beyond everything we know. It's really a deep suffering that it's important for me to.
Cochav, it is, and I use that phrase, pre-civilizational barbarity. And
Yeah.
the strategic purpose I'm hearing from you, and thank you for illuminating us. I'm hearing the pain that you and others have gone through. My listeners know that I've seen the 49-minute GoPro video myself, and I know that you've seen more than that. And one of the things that has so shocked me in all of this, the images were taken by Hamas. They were loaded. They were put on the internet. It was all public and still is.
Yeah.
It's all there, right? It's all there. Not the worst of it, and as it shouldn't
Yeah.
be. But if you try hard enough, people
You
will
get the
find it.
image. Yeah.
And then documenting their own crimes, denial comes in almost immediately in a number of different ways. Denial emerged quickly. In one sense of denial, it is a denial, what I will call a denial of acceptance. The American academic anti-colonialism, that famous line that one of them said, this is colonialism. What did you think or decolonialism? What did you think that meant? In other words, this was all legitimized as a anti-colonial attack. So it was legit. That denial became legitimization. Another denial is, as we now know, that it just simply didn't occur. Another denial is using images of the Shoah to document, similar crimes, not that Hamas has committed, but Israel has committed. So there's denial, and of course the denial that says it never occurred, it's all propaganda.
Yeah.
I've never understood it, Cochav. It came immediately, and it has persisted for 2.5 years. There's many questions I have around that, but I want to start with the most important one. And it's something you've written about that I've read. The denial compounds the original atrocity. It is so psychologically devastating for not only the survivors, but for those of us close to the family, 1 degree, 2 degrees separated, why do you believe the international community, and you've described it when you went to the UN, why do you think the international community as a whole was prepared to doubt Jewish victims and to, even when the evidence is assembled, accepted the story of denial? Why?
Excellent questions. First of all, I want to say something about the fact that, remember how I said that I found myself at the UN meeting,
Yes.
delivering a speech all shaky, and asking them, is there international law for Israeli women? Are you going to protect us? And I said, you're fueling denial, you're fueling hatred, you're casting doubt that really joins Hamas propaganda. I couldn't wrap my head around it. I couldn't wrap my head around it. But you know what words came to me a few days afterwards? Was, are we even human? Are we human? Can't they express simple solidarity, empathy? You know, I teach my students international law, and at the first class, they ask me, what is this kind of law? You know, it's only words. And this is when I tell them, you know, it's the first class that words matter, that universal values matter, that giving voice to the victims, this is, although it's so soft power, it's so, you know, it sounds just declarations, but declarations count. And when those softest mechanisms failed, it was devastating. It was, I think, you know, when people that represent victims of sexual violence, having seen them, you know, sometimes go and claim and fight for being recognized as victims for many years after, they know that what's really important for those victims is being believed, is someone telling them, I know you've been through hell. I know what you've been through. I'm here for you. I believe you. I'm here to help. And we were denied that. We were
Yeah.
denied that. The victims were denied that
Why?
instantly as
Why? Why do you think? It's not just anti-Semitism. Why?
and collectively. Why? So at the beginning, I remember thinking of procedures and different technical issues, and I said it's never justified. I cannot justify this, especially when we have hostages that are probably now going through hell of sexual violence. So many women and children and men were held by Hamas, and we were so concerned for their condition. So I'm sure, first of all, it's institutional anti-Semitism. It's processes, long processes that started way before, perhaps a couple of decades before
Yes.
October 7th, perhaps more than a couple of decades. I can trace this to around the Durban and around 1975, maybe, when Zionism was, you know, introduced as racism. So it's processes of demonization, of dehumanization. Really, I saw how the international system, the social media of the international system of the UN was instantly abused to demonize us as Israelis. You know, you said genocide was a word used instantly after October 7th. During the meeting that I went at the end of October, they said I was surrounded by around 50 pro-Palestinian, pro-Hamas group. I cannot call them pro-Palestinian because I have so many Palestinians friends. They're not pro-Palestinians. Pro-Hamas group saying Israel is committing genocide. It was so early. I was shocked. My heart was pounding. What are they talking about? We're not even, as you said, we're not even inside there. And it was about setting vicious facts very early. They understood the battle, and we were found confused. And when you ask me why, and people ask me why and why again and again, so I think it's very deep institutional anti-Semitism. I think we're seeing an international system working against us as a people. And
Yes.
I want that to sink in for a moment. An international system working against us as a people. It's a legal system, a lot of mechanisms that are operating in a very anti-Semitic way, in ways that I think they already abuse also. They abuse the human rights language. And these are going to be the historical lessons that we're going to learn, the next generation in 20 or 30 years from now, that this is what's happening.
It isn't, and I've written about this institutional delegitimization of Israel inside the United Nations. And when you look at it, there are committees and structures and, the United Nations Relief and Works Agency. There's whole institutions devoted to this particular thing. But it goes even further. And, I saw recently Ilana.
Yes.
Yes, I
Sorry
saw.
about the former hostage speaking at
Yes,
the UN. We were together at the Human Rights
Grudetsky,
Council.
yes.
Yes.
She spoke at the UN Human Rights Council and spoke to the woman there who
Rima Salem. Yes.
who'd given this report and had, not mentioned anything about, of course, about Israel and what had happened and sexual violence. And all you see is this blank face in the United Nations. And to me, it was a moment of, actually, I get it. It's not about facts. It's not about the historical record. It's only about a narrative. And never let facts get in the way, which is why I know so many friends of mine were so disappointed in the Me Too movement, Me Too unless you're a Jew, in the women's organizations that they had, like my wife had spent years working with and inside and supporting, and their silence was Cochav, was shattering. It was shattering their silence.
Say shattering, and really broke my heart. It broke my heart to see Ilana. It broke my heart, as if I'm carrying the hearts of so many Israeli women that are. I feel myself betrayed because, I'm speaking now. I've never studied anti-Semitism. I was all about women's rights. I teach feminist theories in international law. I teach about the feminist movement, about the achievement we've gained as women worldwide, about, different women coming from different backgrounds. And I myself, all the stories that we carry. And I felt so betrayed. And I was there and I saw Ilana and I felt, I delivered a speech a day after her and I said, where is the compassion? Where is the compassion? I'll ask it again. Where is the compassion? This is the basic thing they should have expressed.
Yes.
We should have seen her, the UN rapporteur, standing there on the, on the stage.
On the stage.
Saying, I believe you. I know you've been through hell, Ilana. I want to help you. Instead, you know what was her response? Israel didn't invite me to come to Israel. Wow, I've heard her saying this, and I was furious. I was like, no, you're seeing a former hostage that has been through hell. You need to recognize what happened to her. And she couldn't even do that. And so I'm saying this is the failure, expressing compassion. This is basic humanity, and this is where the system fails.
And it fails miserably. More than that, we opened this conversation using that word truth. Such a used and abused word, Cochav.
Yeah.
Now we have, and I want to go back into the story of your documentation and how, the legality of it all. And I do want to go there, but.
Oh, by the way,
Yeah.
I said it in one of my speeches. I found myself in Canada. It was November 2025 that she publicly denied the crimes and said that she couldn't find evidence. I screamed, not scream, but, I said at Halifax International Forum, come bear witness. We have the evidence. Come and see it. Come speak with the families, come speak with the mother of Shani Luke. She was paraded in the streets of Gaza almost naked while the crowds are spitting on her and while they were filming her. So, this is about bearing witness and the human capacity to bear witness and the capacity to believe victims.
I think you've picked up a theme, which is the lack of compassion, when you demonize a person or a group, there is no empathy. There can be no compassion because you've built your version of truth around a narrative that if facts shatter that narrative, you've broken down, as we said earlier, this epistemological basis for understanding the world.
Yeah.
And that's they can't admit that our heart goes to the Jewish victims or the Israeli women who suffered violence. The bigger question that concerns me is, what does that tell us about the world we now live in, that your children and my children are living in, about the information environment in which they live, about what truth is? I don't know if we've got an answer here, but it's frightening that this is occurring. So what do you think this tells us about the world we're in now?
I'm trying not to be pessimistic, I'm trying to hold on to the hope that truth will find its ways to prevail. And what does it tell us about the world? I think it tells us say that we're living in a dangerous world, that
I think that the truth must ultimately prevail somewhere. You made an example. You said early on, after October 7, we were all very confused. We're all very upset at what had happened, and already the narrative had come out, right? Already denial had occurred. We take time to assemble the
yeah,
facts, and we don't have a narrative that we need to pursue. So we don't have a constructed, information ready to go.
yeah,
You know,
exactly.
we don't have that. So
To add a few thoughts about what you said about what does it say about the world. I want to say something. Since October 7th, my strategy personally was to find those who are willing to believe.
mm,
I couldn't find any additional value in communicating with those who spread hatred, with those who deny, with those who are um, really denying the truth. What I did was finding those who were willing to help, those who wanted to hear what we know and what we don't know yet. I found myself meeting world leaders. The UN is comprised of states. So instead of engaging with so many mechanisms that were not even willing to communicate, were not even responding, those who did respond sent responses like, do you have proof for your allegations? Which was, at the beginning, sending them so much information and video, it felt, as I said, as another form of violence in itself. What we did is we went to states and we shared with them the information and with experts, and again, with a very credible information, because we wanted to make sure we maintain this as a as as a relationship that is going to be around facts. And I think that was the key, because, and that is the key even now, because to deal with this kind of dangerous developments, because now we've formed such strong developments, such strong, sorry, relationship with world leaders and experts that are there fighting this terror, that are there trying to combat this anti-Semitic narratives. And I think what they understand is the fact that Hamas, the use of technology, the filming of the violence, first of all, brought the violence to them as well. Much of their society was exposed to these crimes. The French society, in Canada, in the United States, they saw the violence. Even young people see the violence. They know that it affects them. It affects the foundations of democracy worldwide. And the fact that they were using technology to amplify sexual violence, to amplify the crimes themselves, what they are doing is that they are inspiring terror worldwide. They are inspiring other terrorist groups in other places in ways that I remember saying to them that I'm concerned that, terrorists around the world are seeing these videos while our response is being, we are horrified watching this. It took us months to understand that it's actually very inspiring stuff, very inspirational videos that could be copied by others, especially the videos of the families. When you see the suffering of a family member, of a father, of a mother, of a brother or a sister, one of the devastating videos is when the family of Arava, when Dikla needs to separate from her son and she tries to hold his hand and they take him from her. It's like those images stay in your head. Or Shiri Bibas, Shiri
Mm.
Bibas
Yeah.
taken with her
Yeah.
two babies. These are videos that they understand the power of and the destructive power it has. So to go back to your question, I think truth matters, and this evidence matters in ways that are going to help us fight this and are engaging people in the most important positions now. I can't say all of them. I can't say that it's something that is sufficient, but I think they will have to deal with it the same way that Israelis are now dealing with it.
That's exactly right. You know, it strikes me that the difference between the barbarians, the Nazis did everything they could to hide their crimes. And as you were describing that, Hamas has done everything to publicize its crimes in order to use technology to reach more people and inspire people. So collecting the facts is one of the, I'm going to use this word, antidote. I don't know if it's the right word, Cochav. And what you're doing, collecting testimony and building the evidence base which will survive scrutiny in international forums and in courts, decades from now, is just something so important. It's just so vital. What are you doing to ensure that the work you're collecting is going to be of that standard that is unarguable in its factual and truthful basis?
I'm smiling because I understood it very quickly. I understood that we have to do it in a way that, I remember one of the first thing I was asked after October 7th was, how do I know it's not AI manipulation, that the videos are not AI manipulated?
Yeah.
And it was a few days or a few weeks, just in the month of after October 7th. It wasn't even, month after. In the month of when they live streamed, they just live streamed this violence, not to Israelis, but to the world. And the fact that very respected journalists were asking me, how do you know what you're saying is not AI manipulated? It made me understand that we need to pause and very structurally bring world experts to, first of all, there are protocols of how to preserve videos and digital materials in ways. We are not the first nation or that are dealing with an atrocity that has been filmed. We are the first one that it was filmed so wildly, but there, the Berkeley protocols and other international protocols deal with the preservation of digital materials. We took, first of all, the head of the archive. She was one of the very senior officials with the USC Shoah Foundation archive. She has over 25 years of archiving, including in atrocity site, including with the Cambodian tribunals. So our goal was to bring the best experts in the world to guide us how to do this in a way that is internationally recognized and internationally and admissible in legal forums. So this was it took us months to begin to film the testimonies, because in order to film testimonies, you need to bring trauma experts, you need to develop an ethical code. So we did everything in such a rigorous way because we knew the the first thing they would want to do to us is to discredit this work and to discredit the testimonies of the victims. We filmed this, for instance, in a way that is not edited. So you see it just in the Holocaust form of it, that you film it in one shot. We have trauma experts that make sure it doesn't add to the re-traumatize victims. And it's a very, very long and difficult and complex process. At times, I'll be honest, Adam, at times I felt we took upon ourselves the impossible. We've done the impossible, or I didn't think we will be able to complete this. It was so difficult, especially the exposure to trauma, especially needing to document it while war was still going on and while people were traumatizing with the bombings around us and traumatized by the materials. And very few in the world wanted to bear witness to this.
Very few. Very,
Very
very few.
few.
Very, very, very few.
We knew that if we wouldn't look at these bodies, no one will look at them. No one will want to.
Cochav, I saw the GoPro video and I went down the south. It's just a few months after October, and I had to come back, and I was so traumatized by that experience. So I can't imagine. And I mean the word trauma in its richest sense. I had to see someone to unpack it. I can't imagine what you and your team have gone through. I can't imagine it. It is.
I think only now we are beginning ourselves to understand what we've done and what we've done to ourselves, and we're looking for healing spaces now. It's very.
But the moral injury, not just the traumatic psychological injury. I keep thinking, the moral injury that has been inflicted is just so, and it has been inflicted, right, not on Israeli society and on Jews around the world. No other nation no other minority is asked to be collectively responsible like we are. I feel some days when I'm singled out in the Labor Party, a genocidal baby killer, all the usual, words that just sort of come out of someone's head because that's the narrative that they know to say, and they don't truly understand what they're talking about. In one sense, I have to say, I feel it as a badge of honor that they would inflict on me the need to be a scapegoat for our beloved Israel. In a very small way, it is an honor, but of course it's a moral injury that is completely misplaced.
I think it's brilliant that you put it this way, and I want to add to that. I've been very involved in the women's protest movement. As you introduced me, I was involved in fighting the judicial overall, very much involved in the human rights movement, and still is. And people come to me and ask me after my talks about the sexual violence, we want you to be critical of your government. If you could just add a few words about how terrible
this government is, then you've got to pass.
And exactly. Well, I feel that I'm internally fighting this because, of course, I have my own messages to when I speak to Israeli audiences, but I'm just so furious that my legitimacy as an expert is only if I'll add to the demonization of my own people, my own country.
At which it will be used.
In a situation when I know our very right to exist as a country, as a nation, is at stake.
Yeah.
Well, I do this enough when I speak here in Israel, and I just it's like you said. I don't know why it came to my mind, the fact that people are coming and feel that they need to tell me, if only you would have added how terrible is your government. I don't know what's the point.
It's part of the narrative, Cochav, and I've seen it here a lot. It's part of the narrative of equating Hamas and Israel. Not the government, Israel. It's part of that need to equate, so decrease the demonization of the barbarity of Hamas as just a post-colonial fighter movement with a terrorist state. So if one is terrorist, you're both terrorist. If one is this, then
Yeah.
the other is that. It is an equation, and that
Yeah.
to me is the
Always.
moral injury, right? That's why people get so caught up in point scoring about how many people have died, because that creates an equivalence. And from what you've seen and from what we know, there is no equivalence here.
Yeah, I
Um,
agree.
there is none, but people need that as part of that narrative construct around.
Exactly. That people need that as part of the narrative construct. I think this is the point. And it's also, before October 7th, I was invited as a keynote speaker to a conference. It was a year before October 7th or a few months before October 7th. I don't remember, but I just remember how I showed that different democracies around the world are being, how would you say, destabilized by different anti-democratic forces, whether it's the United States that we just had this anti-abortion movement gaining power, whether it's around Europe and Eastern Europe and the gay community rights. I was just delivering a lecture of anti-democratic forces around the world. My point is just the singling out of Israel. The singling out of Israel, I think that is it. It's not just the construct of the narrative. I think it's brilliant the way that you put it, but it's also about singling out Israel. It's not about the government. It's about Israel as an entity and delegitimizing its existence.
Yes,
So
and it even goes further. Why why does the far left, for all that it's supposed to stand for, a secular movement, align itself with an extreme Islamic, theological, theocratic, anti-women, anti-gay movement? They are united. And what is it that they're united about? They're ultimately united not just about Israel as the source of evil in the world, but anti-Semitism. And that's why anti-Semitism is the proverbial canary in the coal mine in Western democracy. Because when you attack the Jews, it's easy. We're a minority, we're small, we're also very successful, and we're very proud, rightly so. But when you attack the easy minority, you're attacking the foundations of the values of the Western system itself. And this is why my argument, Cochav, is part of what you do and what we're all doing is reclaiming the center. It's reclaiming the true values of a liberal democratic society in holding together the differences that bind us all while keeping us unique. And it's those forces who are so opposed to Western liberal democracy that the common thread is where anti-Semitism fits right in the middle of that, because that's an attack on the system by attacking us first. And it is what's happened in the last 2.5 years.
I think it's right that you say far left. I
Yeah.
want to say that I've had the privilege of meeting many, as I said, around the world, from women's rights organizations to feminist scholars. Some of them do not want to be public because they're scared about the cost of standing with us. Many of them. For instance, we were accompanied by, were guided throughout the writing of the report by a US-based center that for 20 years documents sexual violence, but they couldn't allow us to use their name because of the concern of what it will do to them, the fact that they helped us understand the dynamics of the sexual violence against Israel's. Even that in its own, it's something to study. But I do want to say that they, at the end, they helped. They were with us every step of the way, and many experts in the. I wanna. And what I'm saying is that I'm hopeful that there are those who are still fighting for liberal values.
Yes.
And I want to say to all of us, you said that they are scared the Jews are successful. It's so interesting to me because I studied at UPenn in Philadelphia, Penn Law in the United States. And I remember coming to the international program and sharing the problems of poverty in Israel, the fact that they are underprivileged communities, the fact that I myself came from a challenging city. And, it was striking to them to understand that there are Jews that are in poverty, that are not successful, that Israel is confronting these issues. And on the other side, it was striking to me that they saw us as, I don't know, something that is not human, not the regular human. And I think this is part of it.
It is definitely part of it. Many viewers of this, listeners and viewers, Cochav, will see October 7 as a uniquely Israeli tragedy and Gazan tragedy, and it is. It's a uniquely Israeli and Gazan tragedy.
I agree.
Why should Australians, Europeans, Americans care about the legal work your commission is establishing and the precedents in international law that you're striving to create? Why should they care about that?
You know, we, from the very beginning, remember that I told you that we saw the torture of families, that we felt that we have no legal words to describe this. One of the things that happened is that we met with victims from Ukraine, victims from Iranian activists, Yazidi communities. One of the most interesting conversation for me was with Nadia Murad. She's the Nobel Prize winner. She documented the sexual violence and shared her story about the sexual violence against the Yazidi community. And one of the things that she told me when I was telling her, Nadia, we're documenting this sexual violence and we're also seeing the violence against families. And she paused me and she said, "What did you just say?" It's like, we're documenting also violence against families and how they have been tortured and had to witness the suffering of one another. And she said, "Please write that it happened to us as well. Please mention that it happened to my family, to the Yazidi community." And when I sent the draft of the report to the head of the Professor David Crane, the head of the tribunal in Sierra Leone, he told me, "Cochav, please mention that it happened in Sierra Leone." So we dedicated a section in the Kinocide report showing how each and every community may suffer or have suffered from this. So this is really a global struggle. It just taken a form here in Israel, but we are really globally fighting sexual violence, globally fighting extremist groups. And even my sisters in Suwaida here in Syria that today is the 1 year to the massacre in Suwaida. And we're like, our hearts were broken when we saw our sisters experiencing similar atrocities right across the border, and we felt so helpless. Sorry, we felt so helpless. They needed our help, and we didn't. We didn't have we did whatever we could. We sent humanitarian help, and as a civil society, we did whatever we could. It's just to say that this is a global struggle, and it's not Israeli or just Israel's. And the value of documenting these crimes is about understanding them better. One of the things that I'm saying is that we cannot prevent crimes that we don't understand. We cannot prevent things that we continue to deny happened. So I think the value and the contribution of the report that we did on the sexual violence is actually within the details of the dynamics of sexual violence and what it looks like. It closes the gap between what the public fantasizes about sexual violence in conflict and the reality of mutilation and deep suffering of victims. That I think if people don't read this, we are missing something. It's not an Israeli story. It's our fight
It's a
as a humanity against
it's
these
a
atrocities.
human story, and the excuse we didn't know can no longer apply to these things when it's happening in so many different places now as you're describing it. You know,
Adam, can I
Cochav,
add something else that I think
yeah,
is important?
please.
We spoke about a lot of, we spoke a lot about the intentional denial, but those who want to deny, or those are denying from political reasons or from anti-Semitical reasons. But I want to talk about our really psychological denial. The fact that a lot of these things that we share seems really are beyond comprehension. That you believe that they're true, but you cannot really wrap your head around it happening. And I really want to emphasize the fact that many tell me that they're scared of reading the report and share with me how difficult it is for them and the traumatizing effect. And I understand it. I want to say to all of those who are listening now, I truly understand it, especially those coming from Israeli communities, Jewish communities. It's very traumatizing. I do insist that it's our obligation, and especially the obligation of decision makers, of those who work in the areas of national security. This is not an academic exercise for feminist scholars or for those who are dealing with sexual violence. This is a must read obligation to leaders around the world. So, and we have an obligation for our children to face this truth and confront it if we want to prevent it.
We must confront the truth. I have on my desk a sign which I've just pulled out, and it's my favorite saying since October 7th, Cochav, and it's in Latin of all languages. Magna est veritas et prevalebit. Truth is great and shall prevail. It's exactly what you're doing, but you're doing it by writing history. And it's really important. Your conversation, leaves a darkness and a hole in my heart, because you're dwelling with humanity at its worst, and you're documenting these things. So my question to you, as a fellow human being, as a mother, where do you find the hope? What convinces you that documenting evil can ultimately strengthen our civilization rather than simply catalogue its failures?
I don't want to cry. It's a question that I've asked myself many times throughout this journey. Why are we doing this? Why is this important? Why continuing to hurt our souls and to, first of all, because we have an obligation not to look away. And as I said, for us, it was a last act of justice to the victims who couldn't speak or those who are too traumatized to speak. It was just that, the sense of justice of making sure the world knows what happened to them. I'm sure they were present in some way, just it felt that we have such a moral obligation for them and for people that to know that what happened to them. I think my motherhood, the fact that I have 4 children, and the little one was now on almost 2 when October 7th happened. It kept me with a deep sense of purposeness, they were my healing, the fact that I cooked and I cleaned and I spent time making puzzles with my young one, and I saw my eldest son with 16. He's talking about how committed it is um, to the values of this country. I felt that we cannot fail them. We cannot fail the next generation, as simply as that. And we have to find bridges here in the Israeli society. We have to find bridges to all the nations around us. And also remember, I find myself repeatedly saying lately that we have to remember that the same amount of goodness exists in this world as there is evil. We really have to remember that it's not just all evil. Goodness exists in so many people that we've met along this journey. So I want us to remember that and hold on to that.
Let's hold on to goodness in even the darkest days. Cochav Elkayam-Levy, the commission into the 7th of October and the violence against women and girls, may you continue your work with strength and resilience and goodness and love in order to bring light into the darkest places of the human soul and the soul of Israeli society. As we finish, you've mentioned some websites and some speeches and documents. So can we just go through that and make sure that listeners and viewers, watchers can find those references? So firstly, the website for your organization is what?
civilc.org.
Sorry, say that again. Civil,
civilc.org.
civilc.org.
Exactly. That's the
That's the
website
website.
of the commission. If you Google the words silence no more and the Civil Commission of October 7th, you will see our report. If you Google Kinocide report, the Kinocide report, you could see our publications and the report itself in our website. And it's also important for me to share that we've dedicated a full section to sexual violence against men and boys. I want to say that we took upon ourselves, once we understood there was also sexual violence against men as well, we documented it, and we have a full section in the report dedicated to the men and boys that were affected in a very cruel way
Yes.
on October 7th and in captivity.
Cochav, thank you for all of that. And
Sure.
from strength to strength, we
Yeah.
wish you well, and we hope that the commission does its work and winds up as quickly as possible in order to have laid the foundations legally and with that right evidence that you've talked about, and we can heal the deep psychological and moral fractures that are in Israel. Thank you so much for being on Behind the Headlines.
Thank you so much, Adam. Thank you for having me and for all of the listeners that have joined us.